Welcome to Authentic Living with Roxanne on Global Voice Radio. Join Roxanne Derhodge and her thought-provoking conversations, the catalyst to live your life to the fullest.
Hi everyone, it's Roxanne Derhodge again, the author of the Therapist Insider's Guide, Healing the Past. And today I have an amazing guest that I've probably known over 25 years, Louise Mercier Sadler. And Louise has graciously allowed us the time today to come in and talk a bit about her experience with online dating. But I'm going to tell you a little bit about her background and so that you can know what Louise brings to the table. She's a respected psychotherapist and hypnotherapist who brings over 25 years of clinical experience in the human services field and is the founder of Vibrant Life Consulting. She's worked with individuals, couples, families, and groups specializing in addictions treatment and has also worked as a presenter speaking to large companies on various topics related to wellness. She's a graduate of the University of Toronto and works in various modalities such as solution-focused and brief intervention. She is a member of the Registered Psychotherapists of Ontario, the National Guild of Hypnotists, and an affiliate associate of the Ontario Association of Counselors and Consultants. Her approach is client-centered and solution-focused, providing clients with a highly supportive environment where they can develop strategies to empower themselves to achieve growth and success. So welcome, Louise.
Thanks, Roxanne.
So how are you today?
Actually, quite good.
Good. Yeah. So this topic obviously is something that I know that when I get interviewed on dating, obviously most people want to talk about romantic relationships.
Absolutely.
And unfortunately, with what we know out there with separations, divorces, about 60% first marriages, even higher when second marriages that end in divorce or separation. There's a lot of people out there trying to meet someone, right? So gone are the days where you and I were at U of T and could kind of meet people in our class and pubs and things like that. We're at a different stage. So I thought your topic and your experience would be quite interesting for my listeners. So I wanted you to tell, just to tell me a little bit about yourself and then tell me a little bit about some of the things that you've learned about online dating with your experience.
Okay. Well, I'm obviously, I was married. I was one of those statistics. I had my first marriage. I was married for approximately 19 years, and then that ended. I have two children from that marriage: a 22-year-old son and a 19-year-old daughter who's in college, and my son's also in post-secondary. I live in a small town, and I have since remarried, and yes, I did meet my husband online. And that whole situation was quite a surprise to me. If you had said to me, 10 years ago, this was going to be how my life played out, I would have looked at you quite strangely and thought, okay, there's something going on here. I don't know what you're talking about. So it's not something that I certainly anticipated. But that's kind of the way it worked out.
So that's obviously I know your story, but I think the listeners would be quite intrigued because the average demographic out there, you got every possible site and a lot of people out there with different needs and casual hookups, and some people are looking for relationships. Some people are just wanting to maybe take someone out to an event, those types of things. So there's a lot out there. So
Right.
That said, when we kind of go into a situation and we can kind of vet potentially someone if we're going on a date, but online there's a lot of other variables, I would say, that come into play. So tell me about your experience and kind of some of the variables or things that you learned in chatting with people online.
Okay, so I need to clarify that I wasn't on any dating site when I met you know, the guy who would ended up, you know, the man who'd ended up being my husband, my second husband. I was on Facebook. Actually, we met on Facebook on one of the social apps, not the dating apps. And the reason I was sort of on Facebook was because at that point in time, I was still married, although things weren't going well, and you know, there was no engagement from my partner. And I'm a very social person, and in order to avoid problems, it just so happened my sister-in-law sent me an invitation to Facebook, and I ended up on Facebook on one of the social apps, and you know, this gentleman sent me a message, and we started just chatting back and forth, just for that engagement, for that social and intellectual engagement. So, you know, but once things were there, you know, once things had gotten to the point where, you know, I was no longer with my partner, my first partner, there were some concerns, absolutely. You know, I mean, you read in articles all the time about things to be wary of, things to look out for. How, you know, the lists of, you know, he may not be for real, or he might be a player, or they might be a player if, you know, and there's the whole list of things. So, you know, I mean, it's not like I was looking for anybody, but, you know, having had the friendship develop, these were things that were sometimes playing in the back of my head, you know, and things that I, you know, wasn't completely concerned about, but certainly there were things that I was paying attention to. Which,
So what kind of things were you paying attention to? So it was a social app, all right?
yeah.
You knew, like, you were obviously the marriage was and the process or ending, or it was ending, but you were still in the same home.
Well, that's pretty much the way it was.
Okay. So, and like you said, you kind of, you know, out there, the well-intentioned people that are dating and online, and not without bad stories, because I know you've heard them, I've heard them in my practice. There must have been things kind of going through your mind, like you said, about player, and you know, is he who he is, and all that chatter, right?
Exactly.
So how did you kind of, you know, connect and strain out some of those things, or not? Because I'm going to assume that some of that was kind of real.
Right. So one of the first things that occurred to me was, is this guy, because, you know, just to put some context to it, we weren't able to do the face-to-face thing because, you know, Zoom didn't exist, Skype didn't exist, even that MSN Messenger didn't exist at that point. So really the first little bit of communicating was by writing only, was by the text messaging, those apps, that sort of thing, and exchanging emails. So one of the first considerations was, you know, is this guy who he says he is?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Right? Is you know, is this what he really looks like? Right? Because we hear about those stories where
right.
What you think you get at the end isn't what you truly get. So that was one of the things. And so the only thing that could, you know, that the way that played out or resolved itself was that at some point, you know, Messenger did develop, or MSN did develop the face-to-face platform where you could communicate by webcam. So at some point, that's what happened, and indeed, that, you know, what he was what he said he was, or at least in terms of the physical appearance. The other thing.
So let me interject there for a second.
Sure.
So how long was it that you actually were dialoguing or writing back and forth before physically you seeing him like you are seeing me right now?
If I recall correctly, because it was a while ago, probably about 4 months.
4 months. So that's a pretty long time.
It is.
Right. So let's go back. Let's back up again because I'm going to assume, because I know I'm curious. So I'm going to assume people listening are curious too.
Okay.
With the back and forth, what is it that was coming back and forth that kind of made you think, there, obviously he's interesting enough.
Yeah.
Right? That you wanted the back and forth. What else? What else was happening? Because this kind of brings back to the times when you think of love letters,
Mm-hmm.
or pen pals or whatever, right? Where we didn't have the instantaneous things, like we said, like that we could see somebody or be able to engage with them quickly. So tell me kind of what kind of things you started to notice. And intuitively, what made you want to continue to engage? Or maybe there were other people that you chatted with that it fell off, that you could give us maybe context on that app.
So, what part of that was the actual, the engagement, and the fact that we could, discuss anything, art, books. I think that's one of our first conversations was, regarding a book that I had read. I recommended it to him. He went out and got it and read it, and then we had a chat about that. So it was that intellectual. Initially, it was the intellectual engagement about just a variety of topics, and the fact that we could have those conversations, and our conversations sometimes were fairly lengthy, given our time constraints, because at the time he was living in England. So there was a 5-hour time difference, but just that ability to share, to be able to be open and to say what you thought, and just having that mental fodder, so to speak, that stimulation of being able to talk to somebody about something and having those common interests. So that was one of the things that kind of got me hooked in.
So emotional responsiveness then, because if he went out and bought that book, that's an indication that he's willing to do something, more than just chatting with you at that point.
Absolutely. He wanted that engagement. And so there was that piece. There was also, the one of the first things, the thing that kind of made me that got me at the beginning was, he had sent a message and he quoted literature, right? And again, I wasn't out there looking for anything. So when unfortunately, even though my involvement on Facebook wasn't for that purpose, you do get people messaging you and all that, and we all hear about pictures being sent, and I wasn't interested in any of that. So when he sent me a message and he quoted literature, I kind of didn't want to, right? He wasn't your typical kind of situation, right? And so I thought, ooh, this guy is different. And so I sent back a message, and then there was that banter. There was almost a mental bantering, the sparring that went back and forth, which further absolutely piqued my interest. And just in terms of, okay, this is somebody I could really have fun debating with and having conversations with. And it was just so much fun to be in a conversation with this person. So that's the other thing that kind of attracted me. And then as we got to know each other, it was being able to go anywhere with, there was this comfort level. It was really strange. It didn't take very long. And I felt like I'd known him forever.
So let's talk about that comfort level, because I think obviously myself, with what I do, and obviously you're dealing with clients all the time, but we're talking about a different type of comfort when it's engaging in that way. It's more, right? I mean, professionalism is important with our clients, but when it talks about emotional, we talk about a lot of different things, right? So again, you're coming off a separation after, I know, a lengthy period of time in your marriage, and obviously there's stuff there that obviously made the marriage end, or one would assume you'd still be with him.
Mm-hmm.
So and then how did you compare and contrast?
Yeah, absolutely. Initially, and I don't think it's it's unusual for anyone, male or female, to kind of contrast. And I hate to use the word compare, but I think that maybe not comparing, but when you've been with someone for such a long time, you know, there are certain imprints on you, right? There are certain things that become part of the norm or part of that experience. So when you move to the next situation or potentially, you know, potential situation, I think there's a, not an unconscious, but in the background, it's, you know, and there are things that sometimes I like to call them shadows. There's some things that all of a sudden it feels a certain way, or you're like, okay, you don't, sometimes you notice the presence of something, good or bad, usually familiar. So, you know, for me, it was sometimes, you know, I was kind of paying attention to things that would give me the red flags around, okay, this isn't the kind of relationship I want to have, once we got to that point. But the other piece of it is being aware of the things that were different. And that's part of it, that comfort, right? So that's what created that comfort, is seeing things like attentiveness and, you know, really feeling like a priority, and just that absolute, you know, he was very interested in what I had to say, and, you know, very complimentary, but not in a patronizing way, but really recognizing my strengths, my talents, that sort of thing, and not afraid to say it.
Mm-hmm. So what you're saying then is you were able to kind of sift, obviously, when something ends, there's, I call it shrapnel or imprints, like whatever, or shadows, like you called it. Baggage, you know, unfortunately, sometimes it's heavier than others, and you know, you try to get through it. But what I often say is that, you know, when you're meeting somebody new, you know, we're all putting our best foot forward, right? When we're meeting someone, you know, new, you know, the honeymoon stage.
Yeah.
What I hear is that because you two dialogued a lot, and wrote a lot, that really you were getting into deeper kind of context or understanding of each other.
Right.
That allowed you to really kind of, it sounds like you were listening on a deeper level.
Absolutely.
What you're saying. I don't know.
One of the things about that writing stage, and even the video stage, and I think it's a real positive. I mean, mostly a positive. I mean, the fact that we didn't. So the reason it was a positive is that I remember as a young woman hearing about how decades ago, and at this point it would be centuries ago, that people, they weren't left alone in a room. There was always a chaperone, and oftentimes romances happened over distance. And the way that they happened, because the phone wasn't invented back then, was through correspondence. And I remember thinking as a young woman, how do people do that? I mean, that's just strange. And, you know, because I was born post-sexual revolution. And it just seemed a very strange concept to me to be able to get to know someone at a distance through correspondence only. But I have to tell you that is definitely possible. And in fact, I think it was one of the strengths of this situation, you know, of my relationship, because you know, in as much as there have been really lots of positive out of the sexual revolution, one of the things is that that's a detriment, I think, is that because of that piece, because of the engagement sooner or later, the physical engagement, and the development of sexual relationships, I think that people don't get to know each other. Some people, you know, don't get to know each other as well as they could, and they get caught up in that biochemical, all those feelings, the physical piece, the rush, you know, that whole mood altering things that happen when you engage sexually. And so we didn't have that. So we were forced to have conversations. And so the fact that we could continue to engage on a conversational level was, I think, you know, one of the strengths, right? Because what we know over the lifetime of people is that, you know, as much as we don't like to hear it, you know, the physical aspect waxes and wanes over time. And, as you get older, you get more into the companionate piece of a relationship. And so if you don't have those skills, if you don't have that ability to have those conversations and to engage at that level, it could have a serious impact on a relationship. So that piece of it was really quite interesting for me. It's one of those, oh, okay. And it was one of those things that kind of was different and really sort of made me interested, made me go, okay, this is something that I think I want to keep moving forward with.
So that's quite fascinating, because of what you hear a lot of people online, even though people say they're looking for a relationship, that whole stance of meet the person a couple of times and people get sexually active, and then we know with like the neurochemicals that start happening with intimacy, people start to their lens gets skewed of the person. And then, a lot of women have shared that with me, or even friends, that then eventually it's, it's like 6, 7, 8 date, and then it's done, kind of thing. So what I hear is the difference being that because you guys were really getting to know each other, and, physically you're, on other sides of, you're across the pond, it really kind of facilitated a kind of bit of a friendship.
Yes, absolutely. I would say we were friends before anything else. And in fact, we were friends. I mean, initially there was no discussion about, getting together. And that was for the first, 6 months, I think. He had no idea what was going on with me, because that's not what it was about. It wasn't about, trying to find someone else, because for a lot of factors, right? And so yeah, that it forced that I think what happens is when you're having conversations over whether it's written or over video, I mean, if a relationship, if there's no depth to it, right, you can only have those conversations, those glib, I don't even want to, those light conversations for so long, and then you ran out of things to say. If they're really, you don't know that. But what this did was what ended up happening was, it forced or it really showed us that we had the ability to have those deeper conversations. There was more, absolutely a friendship at the beginning, and then when there was room, when circumstances changed, that's when the relationship changed, from one of friendship to, and I think that was part of what created that want for change on both sides, is the fact that we had that friendship, and there was a certain level of intimacy. We weren't afraid to be honest with each other, whether it was discussing a topic or just stating how we were doing, what was going on, that sort of thing.
So clearly there are some do's and don'ts online that I'm hearing you articulate quite nicely. And I want you to, if you can kind of give some don'ts right now to people when they're engaging online. What would be some of the don'ts that you would say to men or women, right? Because I mean, there's equally as much men out there that are single as are women. What kind of don'ts will you tell them off the bat?
Okay. So a few big ones are, don't be afraid to be yourself. I went out there, and again, I mean, it might be different if you're actively looking for someone, but even then, even if that had been the case, I would say don't be afraid to be yourself. If the person on the other end can't handle that, then they're not the person for you, right? Because I mean, I'm a firm believer of whether it be friends, partner, it doesn't matter, but those close to me, one of the most important things is they need to accept me for who I am, warts and all. And if someone, early on can't handle who you are, then what's going to happen down the road? So that's number one, is just be yourself. Number two is don't be in a hurry to get physical.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I honestly feel that really, really has an impact. I've known of young couples who got together, and it was wonderful, and they started being sexually active early into the relationship, and within months they were engaged and got married or moved in, made that commitment, and a year and a half, 2 years later, they've separated. And of course, I don't know the ins and outs of the situation, but I have to wonder how much of a factor that early sexual engagement has to do with that. And like you said, you have those rose-colored glasses on, right? It changes the lens of what you're seeing with that person. And do you really know the person that you're with?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I think that, it really, and that's one of the things that I understood, that I came to understand about those relationships of bygone days where it was done by correspondence, that they got to know each other. And so, because one of my questions was, well, how can you marry somebody when you don't really know them? But really, I was wrong. I had made a false assumption that they didn't, because in my experience, they absolutely would have known each other as people. And then, the hope would be that, obviously they'd met a few times, and of course the other pieces of the puzzle or the equation were there in terms of being attracted, or, that sort of thing. So that's another big one. The other thing too is, and it's again some of the stuff that your viewers would see, in a magazine, in an article, things like, and then these are some of the considerations that I had, right? Because you do hear about people being players, right? Having a person in a variety of places, that sort of thing, right? A person in every port, sort of thing. But looking out for some of the signs of that, or the opposite, right? And so be aware of those things. Educate yourself around,
What would be some of those signs? To think about it.
Some of those signs is only being able to to have contact with you at a certain point. Usually, like 10, 11 o'clock at night, late in the evening, that sort of thing. Or on the weekends. Not, if you've gone past the friendship stage and you're in a relationship, looking for if they haven't introduced you to friends, or family, right? Because those are indications of, if those things aren't happening, if you're not being introduced to family or friends, if the other pieces aren't there, those might be indications that you're the dirty little secret. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Right? And so and for me, there were, because I'd read some articles, not at the time, but previous. And it was just one of those things that was in the back of my mind. But it wasn't like I was, looking for it, but when it happened, it was like, okay, this guy is not ashamed of me. And I don't mean shame. It's like, he's upfront, he's for real, because I'm out in the open.
So transparency, definitely,
yes, that's right. That's the word, transparency.
Relationships, right? Ultimately, what we want to do is to have a bit of transparency. But when you're starting to date, those mm-hmm. things, you should really be looking, once you kind of get over the initial, well, we've got over the hump of the 6-time date or whatever, really that you're somehow having a fluidity where the person's allowing you to kind of see into his life, or vice versa. She's
absolutely
to kind of, slowly, not, let's go to Sunday dinner at, the families initially.
No.
But to know that, yeah, I'd like you to come out, to the local pub and meet my friends, or I'm going to a play, or backyard barbecue. Mm-hmm. How do we pop in? Those types of things. So kind of that, a bit of inclusion starting to happen. Yeah. The person kind of is available, not, if you're just dating, they don't have to be available all the time, but at least you could be able to reach out to them if you needed them at other times, is what you're saying.
Right, and it's not specific times. And
Okay.
It's not very. It's open. It's public. It's
Right.
There's that, again, that free flow, because we're all busy, but it's not, or don't call me here, or don't call me at this time, or I can only talk to you at this time, that sort of thing.
All right. So those are really some red flags in a way that people
Mm-hmm.
need to kind of look at, which really, I think of, when I was dating, and you were probably dating, in our communities, we would know somebody that knew somebody, the person that you dated, right? I'm gone are those days. Like, I mean, in your example, you met somebody, in a different, country. So there's no kind of centers of reference. Not that makes it sound very businesslike, but truly to some degree, you could, oh, so-and-so's family, this is their nephew, blah, blah, blah. That's gone with a lot of things online. So what I hear you talking about is some of the basic things really in developing, obviously a relationship, because, what you need to do clearly, and it sounds like yourself and your partner did that very well, is you started to really get to know the core of each other's, the values, what's valuable to him, what's valuable to you, your beliefs, potentially how you saw life, kind of what does that other person dream about,
what's important to them,
yeah.
all those things, the priorities in life, priorities at work, just all that kind of information, the stuff that's, makes up who they are and what makes them who they are, and how they see the world and how they see themselves in the world. Just all that stuff that makes you think about, and you're able to look at, and not just look at, but I mean, you get it. There's a kind of a visceral sense as well, but in terms of, okay, this person and I fit together.
And when you say visceral, that's a big word to the average person that
right.
I would know because of the field we're in. But visceral is really meaning what in your term?
That gut feeling that when I talk to you, like, we could have had those conversations, right? And it could have been, I could have said, oh, this is very, very nice, but yeah, I, at a feeling level, at a gut level, thinking, yeah, this person fits with me. They get me, I get them.
Right.
There's really a match there. And like I said, one of the things that caught me off guard, even before we went to the video communications, was like I said, I felt like I'd known him for years already, which was very odd. It was a very odd sensation.
Okay. So a bit of familiarity. And what we know is, and this is an interesting situation, is that a lot of times, what is my gut really telling me? Right? I guess that's the question a lot of people struggle with. When I meet someone, is my gut right or is it wrong?
Mm-hmm.
And it sounds like, you had some weeding out to do with your past. I'm sure there was a lot of positive things, but there maybe were negative things you needed to weed out, and then start to listen to that original gut. So what we know in relationships is responsiveness, connection, safety, security, transparency, some basics.
And that's the thing. That's what set the foundation for me, at least, was that the safety was there. I could say what I needed to say. I could be who I was, and that was okay. In fact, that was encouraged, and that was part of, he tells me that was part of the attraction on his part. And that transparency, right? So having had the safety, being able to say what I needed to say, be who I am, and vice versa. And then also the over time, initially it was okay. We wanted to take our time, because I had said to him, when he proposed a relationship, there was also that thought about, okay, he's over there. I don't know what he's doing. I know what I'm doing. I don't know what he's doing, right? So, which is some of the old stuff, right? Mm-hmm. But also knowing, I this is not something I want to let pass me by, right? I think that this could really be, he could really be someone spectacular. So all I did was, you know what? All I can commit to is one visit at a time, one step at a time.
So not getting too far ahead,
no.
Which is really, again, another thing, in relationship is to, you were trying to get to know him. You're developing that basis of a relationship. And like you said, eventually the honeymoon, stage ends, and you're going back to those core things about, what it means to be in a good relationship with you.
Mm-hmm.
Does he have it? Does she have it?
Yes.
What do they think about family? What do they think about, your older age together? What do they think about get-togethers? All those things you kind of got to know. And then eventually, as we know, within 2 years of being married, to 5 to 10 to 15 to 20, 25, then it becomes, yes, sexuality and all those things are key because that bonds couples, but ultimately it's the companionate end to relationship that becomes very, very key. That ends up, connecting people at a deep, profound level. Makes sense.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Right. And through that, through the discussion and, there were some, even before we went back and forth for 6 years before we got married and he moved here. Wow. So we were going, at first it was every 8 weeks, and then it got to the point where the last few years it was every month one of us was traveling. So every other month one of us was visiting the other in their respective homes, in their respective communities. And so what that, even in that, in the development of the relationship, there were issues that arose, and one of the big telling things was how we handled that together, how we navigated those difficult times, those difficult situations. So, because to be honest, I had no intention. Well, I wasn't looking for anybody at the time when we met, and I also, when we did meet and we got together and we realized that there was, we really enjoyed each other's company, and we really, we fell in love. The thing for me was, I had said to myself, I was not going to get married again. Mm-hmm. Right. The once bitten, twice shy sort of situation. But the thing that changed that for me was the fact that in that going back and forth over the 6 years, and those opportunities came up to deal with things, we weren't afraid to get into the weeds, as it speaks. We weren't afraid to get in there and talk about things and work it out. And so, given that it was important for my husband Michael to make that commitment. So at that point I thought, okay, well, sometimes it's the give and take, right? So, and then at that point, looking at what, having had the skills, feeling like we both had the skills that could navigate the difficult times. Because we know that in relationships, the easy times are easy, it's the fun times, all that. But really what's important is, do you have the skills mm-hmm. to get through those really difficult times? Mm-hmm. And so, having seen that, plus recognizing how important it was for him to make that commitment, that's, when I went ahead. But had the first piece not been there, the belief that the skills to navigate difficult times, I wouldn't have married him.
Right. So you're really talking about long-term qualities that, for anybody that's kind of looking in today or listening in, if they're looking for those things, it's different if people are looking for more casual or whatever. What we're talking about is if you're trying to find, and in your case, you didn't start off your journey trying to find someone, but inadvertently you found a life mate and a lovely kind of a relationship with him, by looking at the core elements of what we know with long-term relationships, that what they are is the ability and the capacity for either partner to lean towards each other mm-hmm. versus away from each other, and to continue to connect on a deep, profound level so that they know what the other person is thinking or feeling at any given point. That said, that's not easy.
No.
Because life gets in the way, but really to know that that's your norm, right? If you're kind of out of whack, you kind of check in and make sure that you're kind of on the same page with the person.
Right. And the ability to if, even, I mean, yeah, it's great if they can, see things. But even if you're not, minimally being able to say, I'm out of whack today, or I had this happen today, and have the person be supportive and say, okay, either listen or how can I help you? What do you need from me? That sort of thing. Absolutely. And you're absolutely right in making that distinction. I mean, if all you want to do is date, that's fine. But still, it's about, really looking at what are your needs. Because I think what I hear a lot of times is I hear people say, oh, I just want to go out there and have fun. But really what they're saying is, no, I just want to hook up, or I really, I'm saying I just want to date, or I just want to hook up, but really what I'm looking for is a life partner. So being really clear, because what happens at that point is you're incongruent, right? And the other individual will pick that up at some level.
Right.
So I think what happens is that congruency piece, so congruency being, where your actions are in sync with, what you're looking for, right?
And that gut switch, or that that GPS internally, what I often think is that people sometimes don't slow down, or they don't spend enough time with the person on the date 10 or 15 or whatever, to really see, okay, is what I'm feeling about me and what I've been through, or is this really about that person in front of me? And if, again, with online dating or whatever, you can obviously achieve those things, because you've talked about that, because 6 months or whatever before you're talking about things, you're talking about day-to-day stuff, not unlike what we talked about with those times where you wrote love letters and you talked, and you created those kind of landscapes for the other person. It's the same thing that I hear happened with yourself and your partner.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's the thing is the biggest thing, well, and you touched on it. One is knowing what you want, right? And that's, and knowing, what your issues are. What baggage are you bringing in? What baggage, not even you bringing in, even yourself before you get into another relationship, is what baggage do I have from my previous relationship or relationships? And working through some of those things so that they don't bleed in to the next ones, right? The other piece of it is and because what happens, I think sometimes when what I've seen people who they haven't addressed those kinds of issues, and they bleed through in that, things like being needy. And so you'll have someone who, they might say, I'm just looking to date, to have companionship, but then very quickly they're trying to move the relationship forward as opposed to letting it evolve.
Right.
And so I think that's where a lot of these things happen. The other thing too is one thing I've heard a lot about is some people, again, not being honest in, I'm just looking for hookups, let's say, using, a really clear example. And then, because sometimes, imagine you got someone who's looking for a long-term relationship and someone who just wants to hook up, but they're not really being clear about it. That, that could be, the breeding ground for a lot of heartache.
Absolutely. And that's unfortunate that happens. But now, Louise, this has been awesome. I'm sure a lot of people are going to want to connect with you. They're going to want to know where they can, talk to you about some of these things. They might want to have you coach them on, on relationships online, or some of the other expertise that you bring to the table. So where, if people wanted to get a hold of you, where's the best spot for them to get a hold of you?
Okay, well, there's two ways. One is through my website, www.vibrantlife.biz. And I also have a Facebook page called called Vibrant Life. So those are the two ways of accessing. So just looking those up, the contact information is there. You can either contact me through my telephone number or through an email, and I'll get back to people.
Well, thank you, thank you, thank you. I know this is going to be watched by a lot of people that are trying to make, heads or tails out of, the wide web and dating. And I think what you've made very clear is really just to be authentic with yourself. And if you're looking for something long-term, which I think a lot of people, in fairness, like you said, are looking for long-term, but they're not voicing that. Mm-hmm. They're going to get back, lots of different people are coming towards them because they're not being clear about what they're looking for. Mm-hmm. So I think that's a fantastic piece of advice, because obviously out there's casual relationships that people can, there's different sites for that, which I think is great. It's, it's not about judgment. It's about people deciding, what they want in their life. But if they're looking for something like in your case with a long-term companionate, satisfying, enduring relationship, that it's possible.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So thank you so much. And maybe we'll have you on again.
All right. Thanks a lot, Roxanne. Have a great day.
You too. Okay. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Join Authentic Living with Roxanne every Thursday, 11 a.m. Eastern on Global Voice Radio.